Hi, this is Group 3, and this is our midterm presentation. So I'm going to go first and talk about the scope and lifespan of variables. So the scope is where a variable can be used, and the lifespan is how long it will stay in memory. So there's several different types of scope. There's class instance scope, and hold on, I was going to show start date view. Okay, so here are class instance variables, and they are at the beginning they go before the constructor function, so that they are available throughout the entire class, and their lifespan starts when the object instance is created, and then they can be accessed anywhere within that class. Then function variables. If you look right here, done is a function variable because it's inside this function right here, and its lifespan starts when the function is called, and it ends as soon as the program stops using that function. And then there's also selection statement variables, and their scope is only within the selection statement. And I didn't have one that I found in my code, so I have it right here. So in this for loop, this I has a scope of the selection statement, so its lifespan starts when the for loop is entered, and it ends when the for loop is exited. All right, so now when we talk about the selection statements, an if statement basically is used when there's only one action to take. So for instance, here I have, if the start date is less than 0, then I'm going to return -1. There's no alternative thing to do. So it's either that is true, and so we execute this block of code, or if it's false, then we skip over that block of code. And if else, you use that when you have two different options. You only have one thing you're testing, but if it's true, then you do one thing, and if it's false, you do another thing. So here we have, if this is true, then you do this block of code, or if it's false, then you do this block of code. An if-else if statement is a ladder. You use it when you either have multiple different things you're testing, or if you have multiple different options that can happen. So you go through, and if the first conditional statement is true, then this first block of code is executed. But if it's not, then it checks the next one. And if that one's true, then the next block of code is done. And if not, then it goes on to the next one. It keeps going through. And then the final one, if none of the other things were true, then this last block of code is executed. And then finally, the switch statement. A switch statement is similar to an if-else if. There can only be one thing that it's checking. So here we have the menu option, and it's going to go through all the different options of what the value could be in the menu option, and it just checks and says, okay, which one is true? And the first one that it runs into that's true, it will execute that block of code. And then if it has a break, then it will exit. If it doesn't have a break, then it will just keep going through and checking and seeing if there's another one that is true. All right, and then I need to walk through my unit test. So I did the inventory control test. And here is my test for the calc barter price. So I put in my variables, my examples for my variables that I came up with in my test matrix. And then I put what my expected result is, and it runs the function and creates a new object instance, and it checks the result against what it expects the result to be, and if it's correct, then it will pass the test. So let me just run the test. and hopefully it will come up. All right. It does this thing sometimes. Oh, there we go. Okay. And it passed the test. So I did it right. All right. Let me turn the time over to Hannah.
Okay, so I'm going to start off talking about the 7 steps of the functional development process. And so for our team project, we did calculating food weight, which is also over here. And so the first thing to do is describe the task. And so use the base weight of 2 animals taken in the hunt, whether the user has a guide, and then calculate how much weight in the food will be added to the inventory. So basically, depending on what animal you hunt, it'll be a certain amount of meat that you get. And then list and describe the input parameters. And so there's base weight 1, base weight 2, and then whether or not the user has a guide. And then the output returned is the amount as a double, and then the resulting, and that's the resulting amount of food that will be stored in the inventory. So the validation rules will be that base weight 1 and base weight 2 must be positive numbers, and the guide must be a 0 or 1. So this is our test matrix that goes over the different inputs and the ones that are valid and the ones that are invalid. And then, so this is our actual algorithm. And this first part right here goes over making sure that the rules are correct and that they're valid, so that base weight is more than 0. Base weight 1 and 2 are both more than 0, and then the guide is either a 0 or a 1. And if they're not those things, then it'll return -1. And then these are the calculations that go over basically that set that if you have a guide, then the amount of food that can be put in your inventory can only be 100 pounds. But if you do have a guide, then the max amount of food will be 200. And then so this is how it's calculated, and then it returns the yield. And then we tested it out and basically put what was in our test matrix into the test, and it ran perfectly 100%. And then there are the memory locations, which is basically going through the program as if it was the computer, and then translate into code, run the test, and then deploy to GitHub. So those are the 7 steps of creating a function. And then going over the function that I did hunt success probability. And I used if and if else's statements. So for the if and the if else, this calculates the month, because depending on the month, the difficulty of hunt changes. And so the way that it works is that if the if and the else statements are for 2 possible different outputs. And so this part goes over if we've gone over a year, so 360 days, and then this is if it's under 360 days, and how it works is that you take the start date and the travel date and divide it by 30. And then for the if statements, it takes the whatever month it is and then change it into a double for the success percentage. And then we also do that with the difficulty, so taking a string and converting it into a double so that they can be added together. And then for a switch, I did in the hunt view. Oh, and then also that tested out fine, and it worked. And my test just disappeared, which is awesome. And I can't pull it back up. But it ran with 100%. And so then for my view, I did a switch. And this is for the hunt view for the different animals that you get. And so for case A, B, C, and D, the switch just makes sure that if it's A, then it's going to be a bison, and that it doesn't have to filter through multiple different options, but that A is always going to be a bison, B is always going to be a wolf, C is always going to be a bear, and D is always going to be a rabbit. And that is that.
Okay. I was just going to show really quickly, here is her test since she couldn't show it, that the hunt control did pass. All right, let's go ahead and turn the time over to Jordan. Actually, hold on, that didn't work. Hold on just a second. There we go. Now you can see that the hunt control passed. All right, we'll turn the time over to Jordan for his part.
Okay.